Welcome to Tanya on Tuesdays. Just posting social media now. Okay, just posting to social media. We get started. Okay, good morning, everybody. Shalom and welcome to Tanya study today. It's nice to see everybody. I don't know who's there, so if you could please post and let me know that you're there, that'd be great. We'll be able to get straight to it. Good morning, Marty. Nice to see you. Anyone else, please let me know that you're there. I see Bob Wertheimer. Shalom. Great. Okay. So, just as we get started, as we wait for everybody to join us, I'm going to do the Hayom Yom today. Today is Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh, the head of the month of Tammuz. It's the first day of Tammuz. It's the second day of Rosh Chodesh. And the Hayom Yom today relates to us, the Torah scholars of the community. You who are joining me here today, right here, right now. We're learning together. And the Hayom Yom speaks to the Mesiras Nefesh, the self-sacrifice, which is appropriate for Torah scholars. What is that? What kind of self-sacrifice is demanded from Torah scholars? Good morning, Harvey. That is, as our sages have expressed it, they quote a verse from next week's Torah portion. When a man dies in a tent, the Torah portion is talking about the laws of purity and impurity relating to a dead person. A dead person imparts impurity. So if someone dies inside of a tent, then effectively everything inside of that tent will become impure. So Adam ki yamus ba'ohel, when a man dies in a tent, signifies the tent represents Torah, the tents of Torah. So a person has to die inside the tents of Torah. What that means is signifying to kill all pleasure taking in worldly matters. For even trivial worldly matters prevent one from being thoroughly devoted and dedicated to the tent of Torah. That is the self-sacrifice that's demanded from a Torah scholar. If you're going to devote yourself to Torah, you're going to have to separate yourself from the pleasures of this world, as the verse is hinting. When a man dies in a tent, if you're going to be in the tents of Torah, you're going to have to be able to kill your worldly instinct, your worldly pleasures. Now, this idea is very consistent with what we've been learning in Tanya for in the development of the theme of Tanya. And that is that we have not one but two souls within us. The soul, which is godly, mission-oriented, and the animal soul, which is the natural soul, which is self-centered. Both of them have pleasures. The godly soul takes pleasure and delight in godliness and holiness, and the natural soul takes pleasure in any physical, self-serving pleasures. And they are mutually exclusive. So when you're experiencing pleasure of the natural soul, you are not able to experience pleasure of the godly soul, and vice versa. This puts into context the Hayom Yom, which seems a little bit dramatic here, as it tells us that you have to completely, divest of the pleasures of the natural soul. And now it makes sense. The Tanya actually tells us that in order to be able to truly experience the pleasure of Torah study, not to merely view the Torah as an intellectual pursuit, but truly to be able to experience the majesty and the splendor, the pleasure of divine wisdom, of divine pleasure. You won't be able to experience that as long as you're invested in physical pleasure. So you really have to decide which one of those you want to take. Now that's going to be quite a dramatic idea that I'm sharing with you. I don't think anyone might. You may not have been exposed to this very intense idea that you really have to let go of the pleasures of this world in order to be able to experience the pleasures of the soul. But before you brush it off, I want you to consider whether you've even associated pleasure with religion in general. I don't like the word religion because religion's just too institutionalized. I'd rather speak about it in terms of your soul. We speak of our soul, and it's an idea that people are struggling to make peace with in general. Do I have a soul? Do I not have a soul? But if we can merely discuss the soul in terms of levels of consciousness, you have two levels of consciousness. You have a godly level of consciousness and a selfish level of consciousness. Think of it that way. And I challenge you to consider if you've associated pleasure with your soul, if you've associated pleasure with your relationship with God. That's my question. Is your relationship with God one which is just something that you have to do? Or is your relationship with God something which is extreme and deep pleasure? That's what today's Hayom Yom is calling us to do. That we're being challenged to take our relationship with God to a level which is actually beautiful. It's deep, it's intimate, it's profound, and it's not just intellectually profound, but emotionally profound. The way to do that is by letting go, by walking away from the pleasures of our natural soul. And that's a perfect tie-in to lead us into our Torah study here today, which is we're learning today Tanya. And today we're hitting the heart of Tanya. Chapter 32 of Tanya in Hebrew is Perek Lamed Bet. Lamed Bet, Lamed is 30, Bet is 2, Lamed Bet is 32 of Tanya. But together that word Lamed Bet actually makes up a word called Lev, which is the heart. Lev, L-E-V. Lev is a heart. So it's not by chance, but rather by divine providence that this chapter of Tanya is the 32nd chapter of Tanya, the heart chapter of Tanya, because today's chapter of Tanya is one that expresses to us the very essence of what Tanya is trying to teach us. So what is that idea? It's going to be fascinating for us to be able to explore that idea, to be able to come face to face with the heart of the revolution of Tanya. Over the past year or two that we've been studying this, we've come across some profound ideas. We've learned about the soul. We've learned about the duality of our souls. We've learned much about our relationship with God. But let's talk today about where the heart of our relationship lies. The heart of the call of Tanya. What that is all about, and that's what we're going to do right now. I'd just like to welcome everybody. First and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge Keith Kleinig. I want to thank you, Keith, for dedicating today's Torah study in honor of the virtual online meeting, our ability to connect virtually despite the social distancing. So thank you very, very much for that, Keith. You can dedicate your daily Torah study at jewishgardens.com/donate. That's jewishgardens.com/donate, or by calling the office. I'd like to welcome Ron Collins and Warren and Helen from Virginia, Graciela, Ed Hockman, Lucy Brown, Terry from Atlanta. And Ed, I want to thank you for sharing this video on Facebook, because that's what's going to spread the love and share the light. So please, friends, if you could like the video and share the video, that would be terrific to be able to spread the light to many more fellow Jews. And again, Lucy, thank you very, very much. Okay, good. So in the previous chapter of Tanya, let's just put things in context. And Bob Wertheimer, good morning. So in the previous chapters of Tanya, we were talking about the two souls. We mentioned them moments ago, how we're constantly experiencing an inner struggle and inner strife. And we spoke about the prize much earlier in Tanya, that what the two souls, the two levels of consciousness are fighting over is the crown prize, which is our thought, speech, and action, our three platforms of actual expression. The souls rage within us, but which one actually gets expressed can only be one. Either one soul in our thought, in our speech, in our action. Each thought is either self-centered or mission-oriented, so same goes for speech and action. And we spoke about a long way to be able to experience self-mastery. That was through meditation, controlling the heart, which seeps down into the emotions. We spoke about a short way, which was an easier realization, not a deep meditation, but an easier meditation to help us realize something which we already know. That was through chapters 25. And then from chapter 26 and on, we spoke about soul hacks. We spoke about important ideas within our souls, within our consciousness, which will serve as blockages to allow us to experience self-mastery. One of them, very, very important, was the importance of joy. We spoke about the importance of joy and how, whilst joy is not necessarily a mitzvah in and of itself, it is the cause for all mitzvahs, because when you're joyous, you're able to overcome and overwhelm your opponent, as opposed to depression or sadness, which is going to make you fall before your opponent, even if you're stronger than he or she. And that, of course, is interpreted in the context of the animal soul waging battle against the godly soul. So we spoke about how to overcome depression and sadness with regards to your own inner spiritual challenges. We spoke about how to overcome sadness and depression with regards to your physical problems, bad things happening to you. And we moved on to talk about talking about how to deal with apathy and how to overcome indifference and insensitivity, where your heart doesn't feel what your mind understands. And ultimately, in chapter 31 last week, we spoke about the importance of realizing, of bringing out a sense of rahmanis, a sense of rahmanis, of mercy, of compassion upon our godly souls. Knowing that our natural souls is far more powerful. We identify more with our natural soul than with our godly soul. By expressing a sense of rahmanis, feeling bad for our godly soul, a piece of godliness, which is literally trapped within us like a prince in prison, then that will allow us to be able to identify and empathize with our godly soul, and to be able to bring us to great joy when we realize that each and every time we do a mitzvah, in thought, speech, or action, we're actually giving great expression to our godly soul. That was a beautiful method that the Alter Rebbe gave us in the last chapter of Tanya, as to how we might be able to reach a state of joy, which will motivate all good things, and and stray from sadness and depression, which will lead to all sorts of horrible things, right? And we spoke about bitterness, how bitterness is a positive emotion versus sadness, which is a negative emotion. But the idea which we left with was that that we have to bring out a sense of compassion, of rahmanis, over our godly soul, which is literally in a prison like a prince, and we can bring that prince back home to the king through our choices of thought, speech, and action. So it was here that we were left with this ability, this interesting ability to identify with our godly soul. And here we come. So despite our dominant alliance being with our natural soul, because most of the things that we do, we tend to relate to our natural souls, to our self-centered drive. Nevertheless, by at least being aware of the presence of our godly soul and expressing a sense of compassion and rahmanis upon it, that's how we're able to bring about a sense of identification with our godly soul, which will lead us to the joy that will bring us to good things. And that's with that we open chapter 32. Well, we start off over here by saying that we talk about the importance of identifying with our godly soul. Amazing things happen when we are able to make that paradigm shift, to at least identify, to at least become aware that we have a godly soul, to feel sorry for the godly soul which is stuck, trapped within the muck of the self-centeredness, the narrow-mindedness, the immaturity of the natural soul. And the importance of being able to identify with the godly soul. What happens here is that everything changes. Everything changes. In the previous chapter, we mentioned that you'll come to a state of joy. And in today's chapter, chapter 32 of Tanya, you'll find chapter 32 in the Tanya books on page 361. It's this Tanya book, the Practical Tanya. That's the one that we're learning by Chaim Miller, edited by Chaim Miller, the Practical Tanya, on page 361, chapter 32. So, in the previous chapter, we spoke about how identifying with your godly soul will bring you to a state of joy. But in today's chapter, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment, but in today's chapter, we're talking about how it is only through an identification with our godly soul that we're able to have functional relationships with other people as well. It is only through identification, our ability to identify ourselves with our godly souls, that we are able to have healthy and functional relationships with other people. If you don't identify with your own godly soul, you will not be able to have a healthy relationship with another. If you're not at peace with yourself, there is no way that you'll be able to be at peace with anyone else. No matter how much you think you're having a healthy relationship, it is essentially a dysfunctional relationship. That is the heart of Tanya. That is chapter 32. Because the purpose of Yiddishkeit, the purpose of Judaism is our ability. Well, one more point. I'm sorry, let me just take that back and say that with the one more point that the Tanya brings out in chapter 32 is addressing the famous story of Hillel, the Talmudic sage, who was approached by a prospective convert who said to him, "Teach me the whole Torah whilst I stand on one foot." Whereas Hillel's counterpart sent this guy flying, Shammai. When the man came to Hillel, Hillel said to him, "What is hateful to you, do not do unto others. This is the entire Torah, and everything else is but commentary. Go and learn." What Hillel basically said to him is, love your fellow like yourself. They call it the golden rule. Love your fellow like yourself. That is the basis of the entire Torah. What we're going to understand in a few moments is why it is that loving your fellow like yourself, treating others like yourself, is the basis of the entire Torah. It's really counterintuitive. It doesn't really make any sense why that should be the basis of the entire Torah. You know, we have two parts to Torah. There's 10 commandments written on 2 tablets or engraved on 2 tablets. The first 5 are religious commandments. The second 5 are social commandments. Do not murder, do not steal. That's social commandments between man and man. But the first 5 are religious commandments. Believe in one God, observe the Shabbos, don't serve idols. Those are religious commandments. How could it be that loving your fellow like yourself is the foundation of the entire Torah? Maybe it could be the foundation of the social commandments of the Torah. But how can it be that loving your fellow like yourself is the foundation of the entire Torah, including half of the Torah, which is the religious commandments, the religious components of Torah? We're going to talk about this today in chapter 32. Once we're able to crack this code, once we're able to understand how loving your fellow like yourself is the foundation of the entire Torah, we'll then understand why this chapter is the heart of all of Tanya. Very exciting stuff coming up over here today. So why is it that you can experience happiness only when you are identifying with your godly soul? Friends, the reason for this is because as long as we're identifying with our natural soul, as long as we're on our default setting, as long as we haven't experienced enlightenment and a state of higher consciousness, as long as we just go with the flow, roll with the punches, and just continue living life as we are just living by default, you're identifying with your state, with your natural ego. And when you identify with your ego, you're by definition in a state of dysfunction. You're never able to experience true happiness. Because the ego, by definition, is insatiable. The ego always wants more. The Talmud states if you have 100, a man will want 200. And when that same man gets 200, he'll want 400, and so on and so forth. The Talmud goes so far as to say that that there's never been a case of a person that passed away who fulfilled even half of their heart's desires, of their ego's desires. Your ego, my ego, is by default, is by definition, insatiable. It always wants more. It's never in a state of peace. It's always worried what other people are thinking. It's always anxious about the future, concerned about the past. It's always stressed out. It's in a state of dysfunction. That's why the ego is always competing with others. Whenever a person who's driven by ego encounters other people, there's always an inherent state of dysfunction, a state of suspicion and distrust. Am I worthy enough? Am I good enough? Is the question that the ego is constantly asking itself when it engages with other people. Now, whether you choose to admit it or not is another story. But this is the reason why people today are so unhappy. And it's not just today, it's always been this way. This is the reason for the world's wars. Why, we like to blame it on religion, but it's really not in the name of religion. It's in the name of insecurity. When people were insecure with themselves, they felt that they needed to conquer someone else's in order to validate themselves. I need to take what's yours in order for me to be happy with what is mine. That's the reason for so many wars. Think about it. Why else would people need to wage religious wars? Why don't you just mind your own business? It's because their security with their own faith was so weak. That's such a weak sense of self-esteem that when you see a Jew davening in a shul, they felt, no, we have to burn down his shul. We have to burn the Jews at the stake in the Auto da Fe, in the Acts of Faith of the Spanish Inquisition. Why did the Spanish Inquisitors have to burn Jews at the stake? Like, what's the problem? You guys have the Vatican. You're in charge of all of Europe. You have the monarchy wrapped around your finger. What's the problem? Why does one Jew davening in the shul? Why does a minion davening in the morning with tefillin? Why does that bother you? Because their faith is not complete unless the Jew is complicit, is joining in their faith as well. It's an inherent state of insecurity. And that's why today, when we might not wage wars like we used to, we're a little more civil. We're a little bit more, we do wage wars today, but at least in our culture, the people on this group, I imagine, are not harboring weapons of mass destruction, but we are harboring a sense of discomfort when it comes to other people. And that's why we will tend to relate to other people in one of four ways. Either we're constantly seeking the approval of other people. We're people pleasers. Could be a people pleaser. You know those people that they'll do anything for a compliment. A people pleaser is effectively codependent. Someone that is not secure in their own sense of self, in their own identity, and they need someone else to validate them. How much validation do they need? Endless supply of validation. That's the reason why codependency is such a state of dysfunction, which is responsible for the destruction of so many marriages and so many broken relationships between parents and children and siblings. Because that state of codependency is essentially, inherently insatiable. You can never give me enough compliments for me to feel good about myself. I need an endless flow of validation to keep me happy. So that's one level of one way of how we deal with our identifying with our ego. Another way is by being nasty to other people, By putting down other people, I push myself up. By waging war against the Jews, I make myself more important. By ridiculing the Democrats or ridiculing the Republicans, that's how I feel better about myself. By them versus us, by speaking down and condescending, by pushing someone else away, is how I lift myself up. That's another way of dealing with our dysfunctional state of unhappiness, because I identify with my natural soul, with my sense of ego. A third method would be anesthesia. It hurts a lot when you identify with your ego. So you want to anesthetize that pain. How do you anesthetize that pain? Well, there's a lot of drugs out there. Some people turn to alcohol. Some people turn to pills. And other people turn to sex or religion or work. People that are workaholics anesthetize the pain of their natural dysfunction, the pain of their insatiable ego, by constantly working so incredibly hard that they say, I'm so good. I'm so amazing. Look at what I achieved. They define themselves not by who they are, but by what they do. They define themselves not by who they are, but by what they do. That is the addiction of workaholicism. And then you have religion addiction. This is an unhealthy relationship with religion, where people become so incredibly critical of anybody who's less religious than themselves, even a smidgen. Is that a word? Smidge? I don't know what that word is. Even somebody who's a little bit less religious than anybody who's less religious than me, they are heretics. And anybody who's a little more religious than me, they're crazy. They're just kooks. That is an unhealthy state of religion, where you identify yourself by all the little nuances, where you become unhealthy. There's a word here. Where you become, maybe somebody can help me with the wording here, where your religion is not done out of love and out of state of health, but done out of a state of compulsion, out of a state of nervousness, out of a state of anxiety, and you sort of calm your anxiety by the rituals. That is an unhealthy state of religion. That is an addiction of religion. That is not an intimate relationship, a loving relationship with God. Certainly not the pleasurable relationship that we spoke about in the Hayom Yom this morning. There's more to this, and I'll be discussing this idea more in the Paradigm Shift class on Thursday night this week, Thursday at 8 o'clock. You can watch that class at facebook.com/myjli. That's facebook.com/myjli, Thursday this week at 8 p.m. I'll be talking about this idea in the Paradigm Shift as taught to us by the Rabbi, just an absolute scuba dive into what we're learning in Tanya. So much deeper, the way the Rebbe takes Tanya to a whole new, deeper level. It's just out of this world incredible. But for the purposes of this conversation today, I'd like to just say that the reason why Tanya chapter 31 tells us that you can reach a state of happiness only when you identify with your godly soul is because your natural soul's ego is essentially insatiable. You will never quench its thirst. The only way you can become happy is when you align yourself not with your natural ego, but with your natural sense of godliness, which is an inherent state of value. What? Wow, I'm a piece of God? You mean God chose me? You mean I am good enough? Not because of what I do, but because of who I am? And the answer is yes. We experience a sense of validation when we identify with our godly soul, because that's who we are, as opposed to a relentless and unrealistic pursuit of happiness that we experience when we identify with our ego, with our natural soul. By the way, this is the reason for dysfunctional marriages. If you're married for 20 or 40 or 60 years and you're still struggling to find peace in your relationship, friends, this is the reason. Because as long as you're identifying, the problem is not her or him. The problem is you. As long as you are still identifying with your sense of ego. Times will be good when your spouse validates you. But you are effectively addicted to your spouse. It's a people addiction. We spoke about sex addiction, work addiction, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, and religion addiction. But there's also a people addiction. You're addicted to your spouse if you're relying on your spouse to validate your sense of insecurity. Because what happens when your spouse wakes up one morning in a bad mood, or not in the mood of validating you as much as your toxicity needs, or maybe your spouse chooses to criticize you? That's when the spaghetti hits the fan. And that's when you have these violent eruptions of emotion. You cannot experience it. What the Alter Rebbe is telling us today is that you cannot experience a functional relationship with others if you don't have a healthy relationship with yourself. When you are able to reach the state of maturity and enlightenment, to divest of your natural soul, to at least you cannot divest of your natural soul unless you become a tzaddik, a righteous person, as we've learned about, who slaughtered or subdued his natural soul. But when you can divest of the alignment and identification with your natural soul, and you now identify with your godly soul, you say the following affirmation: I am a piece of God. I am worthy. I'm going to develop that affirmation, but that's a good one. I am a piece of God. I am worthy. Right there, I think that's sufficient for now for an affirmation. As opposed to the ego, whose affirmation is, I never have enough. I always need more. I think it was Oprah who says that if you focus on what you don't have, you'll never have enough. But if you focus on what you do have, you'll always have more. An interesting thought. If you focus on what you don't have, you'll never have enough. If you focus on what you do have, you'll always have more. The natural soul always focuses on what it doesn't have. It lives in the future. It lives in the past. It wants more. It's always looking at other people, in other people's fields. The grass is always greener on the other side. But the godly soul is not in the past, not in the future, but in this moment. I am. God created me right here, right now. The doctrine of perpetual creation tells me that God is in this moment, not yesterday, not tomorrow. God is right here. There's no room. If I go into tomorrow, I'm alone because God hasn't created it yet. If I go into yesterday, then I'm alone because God is moved on from there. God is creating this moment, and this is where I need to be. I am a piece of God by identifying, by having the courage to come out of the closet, to bring the godly soul out of the closet and say, yes, this is who I am. I am my God, my godly soul. I am a piece of God. I am worthy. You won't need the validation, the compliments from other people. You won't need to anesthetize your pain through addictions of alcohol, drugs, sex, religion, work, and people, and more. You won't need to put down other people in order to prop yourself up because I am already. This is the power of I am, not the dysfunction of I do. And that's the reason, my friends, why the end of chapter 31 tells us that you can't reach a state of happiness unless you identify with the prince in prison, with the godly soul that's trapped inside of your natural soul. Now you're experiencing happiness. And when you experience this degree of happiness, now we enter chapter 32, where the Alter Rebbe tells us, and I'm going to read this together with you on page 361. Now when you'll put into practice the above ideas, so that your body becomes less important in your eyes, your natural soul, your ego becomes less important in your eyes, and you find happiness in the joy of your divine soul, this frame of mind will be an easy way forward to functional relationships with your fellows, to be able to fulfill the mitzvah of loving your fellow like yourself. The Torah sets a very, very high bar for functional relationships. That bar is being able to treat others as yourself. How is that possible? How can you treat someone like yourself? That is only possible. That is only possible when you see others as an extension of yourself. It's only when you see yourself in others that you can treat others like you. But it's completely unrealistic to treat others like yourself when they are not yourself, when they are others. You see, as long as I'm identifying with my state of ego, ego wants boundaries, wants borders, ego wants definition. There's me and there's you. Keep a safe distance. That's ego. Stand back. Don't get too close. That's ego. I'm defined by my separation from you. But the godly soul is light. Like a candle that doesn't lose anything of its light when it lights 10 more candles. When one candle lights 10 more candles, you don't have less light, you have more light. You have more collective warmth. If I have ego, ego is finite. Godliness is infinite. So if I have a finite supply of pencils and I give away 9 pencils, I'm left with 1. I've depleted my principle. But when what I'm dealing with is infinite, my godly soul, and I give it away, the more I give, the more I have. Ego subtracts through division. Light multiplies through division. It's godly. So when I look at myself, when I'm at peace with myself, when I've experienced enlightenment, maturity, and higher consciousness, through having had the courage to identify with the godliness within me, then I can look at someone else, and what do I see? I don't see the car that they drive. I don't see the country club on their shirt. I don't see a job or a salary or a Rolex watch. I see through all of that garbage. I see straight through it, and I see a godly soul beneath. Remember, it was the brilliant wisdom of King Solomon who said that men are like mirrors. The hearts of people are like mirrors. I see evil in someone else only because that evil exists to some degree within me. That's from the Baal Shem Tov, by the way. If something bothers you in someone else, it's only because that thing is a problem within yourself. And how I feel about others is how they feel about me. How I feel about myself is how I feel about others. When I'm insecure about myself, I'm insecure about others. And when I'm at peace with myself, I'm at peace with others. When I feel that I am worthy, I can feel that they too are worthy. When I have the courage to identify and see the godly soul within myself, it's then that I'm able to see the godly soul within someone else. And when I reach that point, when I can see the godly soul in someone else, now I've identified what he and I have in common as opposed to what divides us. If I look at what divides us, there's no possible way for me to respect that person like myself, for me to love that person like myself. It's totally unrealistic. You have a Maserati and I have a Toyota. How am I supposed to love you like myself? You have 4 houses, I have 1. You have 2 swimming pools, I have none. You're married, I'm not. How am I supposed to love you like myself? When I judge you by what you have or what you do, it separates me from you. But when I identify with who you are and who I am, I realize that I am God, a piece of God. And you too are a piece of God, because I see through all the muck, through all the garbage, to see the godly light within you. It's then that I see your godly soul and my godly soul are not just cousins. They're not even brothers. They're one and the same. My light is your light, and your light is my light, because there's only one God. And when I look at a fellow Jew and I see the godliness within them, I say, wow, that's me walking around over there in the Rolex with the 4 swimming pools. Wow. Not that that's important, but I'm like, that's me. And I start to care about you like I care about myself. I don't need you to validate me. I don't need you to notice me. I don't need you to compliment me. I don't need you to tell me how amazing I am, how much you love me, how much you adore me. Because I'm good. I'm worthy. I am a piece of God. Nothing you do can make me feel better about myself because I'm on top of the world. I'm a piece of God. I was chosen by God. We are the chosen people. God chose us. He put a piece of himself within me. I am him. And you too are him. And now when I look at you, all that I see is an extension of me. You know, we were swimming last night, and in the swimming pool, my daughter says to me, she told me a beautiful story that she heard. It was very cute. My Racheli, at 9 years old, she said, you know, there was a Jew who came to his rabbi, and he asked his rabbi, why can't you send me to be a shaliach like the Lubavitcher Rebbe sends his students to become shaluchim around the world? And my 9-year-old told me that this rabbi answered his student by saying that only the Lubavitcher Rebbe is able to care so much for even the most distant Jew in the middle of nowhere by sending his emissaries. It was an interesting story because it spoke to this essence, to this point, which was that it was the paradigm shift of the Rebbe. The ability of Tanya to be able to see through a person's facade and to be able to see through to their essence, to see through to their core, to see how even a Jew who's not eating kosher, who's violating the Shabbos, who claims to be an atheist, even that Jew is my brother and my sister, and I cannot let them go. I cannot forget about them. I have to send my best and my brightest to Ghana and to Vietnam and to Uruguay to go out and bring those fellow Jews home. Such was the vision of the Rebbe. And again, this idea we're going to be developing on our paradigm shift class this Thursday night at 8 o'clock at facebook.com/myjli. I encourage you to join us for that deep dive into this idea. And the way the Rebbe learns this Tanya is out of this world. It's facebook.com/myjli. Thursday night at 8 o'clock. I'll be teaching that class. So hopefully at this point we now understand not only how we can reach happiness when we identify ourselves with our godly soul, and only when we identify with our godliness can we be happy, and how we can never be happy by definition when we refuse to identify with our godly soul. And the second point we've learned so far is that not only can I experience happiness on my own when I can experience this paradigm shift, but I can experience functional relationships with others, with my husband and with my wife, with my children, my parents, with my friends, only when I can see the godliness within myself that will thus allow me, like a mirror, to see the godliness within them. When I see the godliness within them, I won't judge them for what they do. I will love them for who they are. I won't feel insecure by their successes. I will be empowered by their successes. And I won't criticize their failings like I don't criticize my own failings. Because you are an extension of me and I am an extension of you. Now at this point, we can finally understand why it is that Hillel said to the prospective convert who wanted to learn the whole Torah while standing on one foot, why he said to him, love your fellow like yourself. This is the whole Torah, and everything else is mere commentary. Go and learn. Why would he say that? Again, we can understand why loving your fellow like yourself is the foundation maybe of the social part of Torah. But what about the religious commandments of Torah? You know, it's not fair to say that I'm a good person and therefore I'm a good Jew because I help an old lady cross the street. That's not enough to be a good Jew. What about the prohibition against idolatry and the importance of kosher and the importance of Shabbos candles and the tefillin and not eating the fruits of the tree for the first 3 years? These are all equally important commandments of Torah. Torah is not merely reduced to social welfare. Torah is about the will of God being fulfilled in this world, and that's not just about being a nice guy. So how can Hillel say that this is the foundation of all of Torah? And here the Alter Rebbe shares with us the beauty. He says, the only way that you can truly love your fellow like yourself is when you're able to see through the facade and identify the truth within that person. To realize that their ego, their behavior is just a tantrum. Don't judge them for their poor choices. Instead of judging your friends for their choices, accept them for who they are. See through their facade to their essence, to their core, to their holiness, to their light that's hidden inside their darkness. Find the prince that's trapped inside of their prison. And when you do that, that's when you'll be able to accept them and to love them and to have a healthy relationship with them. There was a woman who once came to me. She told me that her father was so cruel to her, she couldn't say Kaddish for him. She couldn't say Kaddish for him. So years after he passed, he had done some very, very evil things to her. And in our counseling together, I told this woman to think of her father as a sick person, not as a healthy person who chose to make bad choices, but as a sick person who was unable to control the light within him, whose light within him was being forced to do evil things by an overpowering animal. I asked this woman to find the prince within her father, to find this abused and tortured prince within her father, and to feel rachmanis for her father instead of to feel anger. And it was amazing to see how this woman was able to evolve and to find the love, to find the light within her father, melting away the darkness and allowing her to experience compassion, not for the person the father chose to be, but for the light within him that was sadly unable to gain expression. If we can do that to our fellow Jews, if we can find the light within them, then we will have cracked the cover. We will have blown the cover and being able to identify the truth that lies hidden within. Remember how we learned a few days ago, a few lessons ago, a few chapters ago, about the Alter Rebbe's drawing from the Zohar, the hired whores, the hired whore. He brought the analogy of the prostitute that was hired by the king in order to test his son, the prince. He asked the whore, the prostitute, to do everything in her power, to use every trick that she knew to seduce his son, the prince, so that the prince would hopefully be able to overcome and overwhelm her temptations, that he wouldn't succumb to her. We said, the Alter Rebbe brought this analogy to teach us that is the nature of our evil impulse. Our evil impulse on the outside looks like it's trying to bring us down to lead us to sin, but on the inside, it's a hired whore. Our evil impulse, our desire for evil, our ego is only a prop on the set to allow us the opportunity to stage our performance. Imagine you have an actor on Hollywood who falls in love with the wrong people on the set. Hello, read your lines. You're not supposed to fall in love with her. You're supposed to follow the lines. That's what we're doing. We're on the stage. We have this ego, this hired whore that is leading us away from where we're supposed to be going. And instead of doing what we're supposed to be doing, we're falling in love with all the wrong people. That's what Hillel was saying to the prospective convert. If you can see through to the truth within everything, find the godliness within everything, find the truth, find the purpose, find the light within everything. Even within your ego, you will find how the ego's purpose is to serve God as well. Even the prostitute is a devoted servant of the King, your Father. It's when you're able to love your fellow like yourself that you've cracked the code to seeing the light, to seeing the godliness within. And that serves as the key to being able to fulfill all the social commandments, even the religious commandments, because you'll be able to overcome any and all temptation and obstacles in your way, realizing that any trouble that comes your way, any obstacle that comes your way is merely a test. A test to test your resolve, to test your mettle. This is the reason, my friends, why loving your fellow is the essence, is the core of all of the Torah, and why this chapter is the essence of Tanya, is the heart of Tanya. Because if we can do justice, to be able to stare our ego in the eye, to stare our snake in the eye, like Moses told the Jewish people when they were bitten by the snakes, and he made them stare at the snake. And he used this quick analogy. They were bitten by snakes in the desert, and Moses tells them, look up at the snake. Why did he tell them to look up at the snake? The snake was the one that bit them. He made a snake on copper, just like that medical symbol. This is where it comes from, the snake on the pole. It comes from what God told Moses to do. Look up at the snake. Why would the snake be healing them? The key word here is up. Look up at the snake. When you look up at the snake, you see the big blue sky behind the snake. And when the Jewish people were able to look up at the snake, they were able to see the big blue sky, the presence of God behind the snake, and they were able to realize that the snake was but a test to bring out the best in them. They were able to see that God had sent this to them as well. They were able to see through to the core, to the heart of the issue, and to realize that instead of getting stressed out from the snake bites, they should find the purpose for which God had sent them the snakes. And that was, by the way, the theme of our class last week on Paradigm Shift. Paradigm Shift we taught on Thursday night. I think you'll find that class at facebook.com/myjli. It should also be on our YouTube page, youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. But anyways, it's when we look up at the snake and we see how the snake is also an emissary of God, merely sent by God to test us. When we realize that the Satan is a holy angel of God to test us, that our evil impulse and our ego is at the state of dysfunction, a hired whore who's also doing its mission to serve God. It's with that approach that we are able to overcome all challenges, all struggles, and all temptations to be able to do what we were sent to this world to do. And that, my friends, is the core. Is the content of lesson 30 of chapter 32 of Tanya. If you have any questions, please do post them. I would love to hear your thoughts and comments and reflections. I'm just going to go a little further in the Tanya, page 361 at the bottom. How can you reach a state of loving your fellow like yourself, or when your body, which separates you from others, becomes less important to you? You will appreciate more the value of the divine soul, which unites a soul. And as for the soul and spirit, who knows their greatness in spirit and their root and source in the living God? Even if you disregard the concerns of the body, that there might be an obstacle in coming to loving your fellows as yourself from the soul's perspective. For example, if someone is inferior to you spiritually, you may find it difficult to love them as yourself. Therefore, the Tanya states here, even if someone appears to be lower than you, spiritually speaking, you ought to humble yourself before this person, for perhaps his or her soul is greater than yours. Okay, I'm going to skip that part, but I'm going to say this. And that's why all of Israel are called brothers. This is where I want to go. And that's why all of Israel are called brothers, literally. Due to their single source of their souls in the one God. It is only their bodies that separate them. And therefore, for those who make their bodies primary and their souls secondary, it's impossible for them to have genuine love and brotherhood among themselves, but only a conditional love, because I'm relying upon how good you make me feel due to the inherent insatiation, inability to be satisfied of my ego. Friends, I'm going to call it a day over here. I'm going to wrap it up. And I'm going to say that today's Tuesday. Please join me tomorrow. We'll be learning Talmud tomorrow morning, 8:30, God willing. And tomorrow night is the Rebbitzon's class. She's going to be, it's on the Rebbe's Yard site on Gimel Tammuz, the third day of Tammuz. And Rebbitzon Khan is going to be teaching a class on letters of the Rebbe, which are beautiful guidance for dealing with life's challenges. That's the Rebbitzin teaching tomorrow night, 8 o'clock on Zoom for men and women, jewishgardens.com/Zoom, Wednesday night at 8. And on Thursday night, I'll be teaching a class called Paradigm Shift, which will be a deep analysis of how we view ourselves, our ability to view ourselves and others, our relationship with God, and our purpose in this world, to experience a true paradigm shift by taking this idea so much deeper in the Rebbe's explanation. So that's taking place on Thursday night at facebook.com/myjli. And with that, I'm going to say thank you very much, and thank you to Keith Kleinig for sponsoring today's Torah study. We really appreciate your support. You can dedicate to the Torah study at jewishgardens.com/donate. That's jewishgardens.com/donate, or by calling the office at 561-624-2223. Remember, the shul is open every day for morning services at 7:30. We really could use your help for a minyan here. We're trying to find 10 brave men to make a minyan. We have about 5 or 6, but we're looking towards 10 brave men to be able to build our base. And Shabbos also, we have Shabbat morning services at 9:30, and that's followed by an outdoor, social distanced takeaway bento box kiddush. So that's also on Shabbat. That happens about 12 o'clock outdoors. And we'd love to have you join us. So thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate your presence with us. And I am grateful for you joining us. Thank you, Harvey. Yeshikoch, great lesson. Thank you, Alyssa. So powerful. And thank you, Keith. Another beautiful class. Thank you so much, everybody. Shalom and have a great day.